Good morning. Welcome to my favorite day of the year. It's Richard Edelman, and today we're going to talk about the results of the 2020 Edelman Trust Barometer. First, I'd like to introduce our panel, who will actually come on after my presentation. Thor Barker from the Wall Street Journal, Helle Thorning-Schmidt, former Prime Minister of Denmark, Brad Smith is President of Microsoft, Sabine Fluxab, who is the CEO now of Iberostar, a family business, Yoshio Hori, who's Dean of the Globus Business School, and Jimmy Wales from Wikipedia. So I'm going to go right to it. We've been covering trust for 20 years, and you have a brochure on your place that describes the major events over the 20 years. What I want you to recognize is that trust has changed, and changed profoundly. The basic premise for trust was established by Francis Fukuyama in the early 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union. And he wrote in his book, The End of History, that in fact it was a strong social construct, an excellent legal system, and upward mobility that would generate trust in society. That compact is now broken. I'll try to describe for you events of the first 10 years of this millennium that then affected the most recent 10 years. The events were Iraq War, globalization, the Great Recession, also the rise of India and China, the billion rising people. That led to events in the next decade. And those events were the mass-class divide, also the battle for truth because of social networks, and we also found an incredible concern about the future of work, which I'm going to talk to today. The hypothesis that I'm going to make today about the construct for trust is that it now relies not just on competence, but it also relies on ethical behavior, because there have been so many violations of trust. Just think about the last 12 months. Boeing, Ghosn, Boris, whatever you want to talk about. The reality of the world is such that people now question whether what they're being told is correct. And that fundamental level of skepticism is what causes a change in the construct of trust. So let me try to give you a snapshot of 2020. Where we are is a largest ever mass-class divide of opinion. And what we do when we talk to people, 33,000 of them, in the so-called informed publics, who are the top 15% of income, top educated, people who read 3 or 4 media a day, and then everybody else. The mass-class divide started in the US, the UK, and France, leading to electoral upheavals in each of those countries. What's happened now is it's transversal. Appreciate the extent of the mass-class divide is in happy Canada, 21 points. Germany, 20 points. Saudi Arabia, 20 points. This we've never seen before. Now double digits in India, in China, etc. It is premised now on income inequality. The break between trust and GNP growth is happening. It's always been in the developed markets, a bit less trusting than developed markets. But now we see a profound shift in motivation and cause. The extent of this is the happy part of the world is India, China, Indonesia, UAE, Saudi Arabia. Note how many of those are democracies. Not a lot. The democracies are losing. And this becomes the question for the next decade. Will it be state capitalism, or will it be capitalism of liberal economic sort? So we've established that the mass-class divide is profound. We've established that it's record number of countries and record levels. But we have to understand why. And the why is that fears are eclipsing hopes. This trust paradox, this idea of rising boats, everybody should be happy, people are foreshadowing what's going to happen in the next decade. And they're foreshadowing it on the basis that they're afraid of losing their jobs. 83% told us, I think I'm going to lose my jobs because of gig economy, because of automation, and because of outsourcing. When that kind of soul-wrenching fear gets into you, you don't lose it. And you don't lose it also, it spreads beyond. In every developed country that we studied this year, every developed country, more people believe that their incomes will decline in the next 5 years than increase. Hence the gap between the rising developing world and the scared developed world. I think my income is going to go down. Also, in 3/4 of the countries, people believe that their social status is going to go down. I'm losing my place in society. I'm scared. I'm scared of immigrants. I'm scared of, just being embarrassed. So I'm going to make much less money, and I'm going to be scared in my social position. But I'm also scared because I actually see that my basis of truth is compromised. 3/4 of people tell us that they don't believe in the media. They think that the media is compromised by fake news. And actually, it's most acute in the US and in the UK. Whether you're a Tory or whether you're a Labour, 30% of people trust in media. That is a really dysfunctional world. In the US, by contrast, Democrats see the media as the last supporting wall for trust. Republicans have an absolute disdain for trust as elitist, sensationalist, and provocative. So the media plays a very big role in all of this. The perception of chasing clicks and chasing economics, bad. The big fact that I want you to appreciate is 75% tell us the system doesn't work. It's unfair. Unfair. And 56% said capitalism as it is currently conceived is a force for bad in the world. And this is across all the democracies, all of them. 70% in France. Capitalism doesn't work. Okay, I've now done the negative part. Time to be happy. There is a way forward. And here it is. There's a new model for trust. And the model includes competence and ethical behavior. Here's what we found. In fact, competence is what business does really well. Get things done. 50 points more than government. Low bar, but actual fact. So here we are in a world where business gets things done. But how do they get things done? That is the question. And the how matters 3 times more than the what. And it's important to appreciate that this ethical behavior part for business is the great Achilles heel at the moment. The ethical behavior is not just transparency, sustainability. Those are all really important. They're not sufficient. The new big house of transparency, of ethical behavior is, do you retrain me? And do you pay me living wages? It goes back to the whole premise of me being afraid. Help us get out of the hole. Give me a hand. I'm in a hole. That's the story. Help me get ahead. Let me compete in the next generation. Don't obsolete me and throw me off to the side. I've seen too many people in manufacturing being discarded. That's why I'm scared. I don't like that. I want to be relevant. I want to be competitive. I want to be a person. Don't make me a number. It's really critical that you appreciate for business, if you think of a graph, business is great on the x-axis and lousy on the y-axis because it's seen as unfair. Unfair. Fix it and we can get to a better place. Now, again, There's work to be done for NGOs, for media, and for government. NGOs, deeply ethical, not so competent, don't get things done. Media has a problem of both incompetence and unethical. And this is data, not opinion. The data part, it gets better for government, wait. For media, sensationalism, chasing clicks, and putting fact and opinion together is absolutely the compromise that you don't want to make. You cannot have that. You have to have clear lines of opinion and fact. And for government, government has to be more local, be more transparent, and stop this sense that rich people can dominate through political donation. That's got to stop. For business, business needs to be the catalyst for change. Business can do it because it has the freedom of action. I recognize the constraints of being a public company, but our study says 87% of people want stakeholder. They want stakeholder, whether it's consumer, whether it's employee, whether it's community. Only 13% say they want shareholders placed first. Probably all the fun people are in that 13. But as a serious matter, it's time for business to lead. 92% said, I want CEOs to speak up and talk about the issues of the day. 92%, up from 70% last year. And those issues include diversity, sustainability, use of data. These are things that business historically hasn't talked about and are seen as too scary. Let me tell you, again, you have two big reasons to do it. The first is your employees. Your employees want you to speak up. 3/4 told us, I will only stay with this company if I feel as if it's value and values. Stand with me. Help me feel as if I'm participating in change. I want to be something good for society. I insist that business can be for good. And your customers. 2/3 of them are brand buyers on the basis of beliefs. Brand democracy is the new normal. It means you've got to take a stand. You need to stand with your customers. And you need to advocate for them. And you need to do this because now's the moment for business to step into the void. It's essential that business lead. I see it coming. So my basic conclusion is that the trust framework has morphed in the last 10 years. And it's happened because of the number of shocks. People are scared about their personal economic condition. It is up to us in the business community to change that. We have to reassure people that they are going to have a living wage and that they are also going to have a way forward. The key question for the next decade is, are we going to retrain the workers such that they feel that they are part of a successful society? With that, Thorl, I pass the potato to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. A fairly bleak message on trust, so thanks for starting us off on that. One of the numbers that really struck me, and Richard mentioned it, was the 56% that now think that capitalism is a negative force in the world. And when you dig through that number, it's not just poorer people, it's across the income spectrum, it's not just younger people, it's across the age spectrum. And I think I'm right in saying there are only 5 countries that didn't think that, which was the US, Canada, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Japan. So this is a fairly pervasive issue. And one of the things I just wanted to start with you, Helle, just, we've got this distrust of capitalism, and yet there hasn't been a surge in socialist governments around the world. We haven't seen some massive shift to the left. The UK obviously just had an election with a landslide win for the Tory party. Donald Trump is in power in the US. We'll see what happens with the primaries. What's actually going on here? I mean, how real is this distrust of capitalism? Is there another system that people are looking for, or is this more of a confusion? Can you just explain, please?
First of all, good morning to you all. Thank you to Richard, because I'm the first to speak. I want to say thank you for doing this report. It's bleak, but it's also really aligns with some of the feelings that we have about what's going on in the world. So thank you so much for doing the report and for all of you for coming here today. What's happening with capitalism? I think the jury is seriously out on whether capitalism and market economy is part of the problem or the solution, and that the figures back that. But what's even worse, I think, is the numbers on democracy that we see in this report as well. Because what we're seeing that is basically the liberal, democratic market economy where the jury is out. And that is a real issue for all of us. And what I'm seeing is that over the next years, we have to find a way to reinvent the market economy so it works for more people. It's a long answer to why the socialist movements are not going up. They are, but in an extreme version. And I think that what's really happening here is that we are in a vicious circle where all the big issues that we're trying to solve, and what are the big issues we're trying to solve? It's tech, artificial intelligence, climate change, guarding our borders, cybercrime, terrorism, our environment. I'm probably forgetting some, but these are the big issues that the global community are trying to solve. But because countries are closing in on themselves, saying United States first or the UK first, we are actually incapable of passing on the sovereignty to each other to be able to solve these issues. And that means that politicians become more and more impotent in trying to solve these issues, and therefore you have an increased distrust in politicians, an increased distrust in the market to be part of solving this, and that is an extremely vicious circle. What also strikes me in this report is, of course, that we're also seeing this distrust in the market economy in Asia. And that, I think, is completely strange. Because if you look at globalization, there's been a lot of moaning about market-based globalization over the last few years. And I admit that there will be like 10, maybe even less % of the global population that will not have gained from globalized market economy. But there's at least 85% of the global population where the last 30 years has been the best years of humanity. And when we think about it, the population of the world has never been more healthy, more wealthy, better educated than they are now. So what surprised me is that you're also seeing this distrust in Asia, where market-based globalization has been a fantastic success. So,
although you are seeing, to be honest, you are seeing in some countries this flip that I think you mentioned, where the developed worlds are the ones that are losing trust. Actually, the developing worlds, the correlation between growth and trust is much higher.
Yes.
So I think it's partly this growth aspect. Yosh, I'd like to bring you in. I mean, one of the things that's interesting is Japan, which has been a very slow growth country for a long time, and where actually the economy's done pretty badly, frankly, has the highest trust in capitalism. Only 35% think it's a bad thing. Can you explain what's going on in Japan? Are people just resigned to the fact that it's not going to be great, but it's the best system available? Can you give any insight into that?
Okay, I'm so glad to be here. I think this is the best event in Davos. And I've been attending the whole Davos like 11 times, so congratulations, Richard. And I've been analyzing this like a survey for 11 years, and I'm finding out that people don't believe in capitalism, and Richard said that. And return is only followed by investors. And Klaus Schwab came up to the concept of stakeholder capitalism this year. However, he said that he found out about stakeholder capitalism in Japan 25 years ago. He was inspired about that. But in Japan, we live in stakeholder capitalism. And the survey says that Japan, people in Japan is least afraid, least feared in terms of pride and dignity, because the society itself is run based on the capitalism, based on stakeholder capitalism with trust. What it's saying in this survey is interesting is that 3 times more people believe in ethics, like integrity, and also about purpose and dependability. And only 1/4 is about competent. Competent is the ability to make return. Ethics is totally different. This is the value. So what we all have to do as leaders is talk about vision, mission, and value. And that should be the core of stakeholder capitalism. Return will come afterward. And stakeholder capitalism believes that customers, employees have to be happy, and then at the same time, suppliers have to be happy, society have to be happy. And the conclusion is that the shareholders will get return. So it's the other way around. Like in case of capitalism, return will come to shareholders.
You're saying that Japan has lived through this, but has got a system that people should actually be looking to as a way to manage through this, where you actually have long looked at the various stakeholders rather than just shareholder returns.
There's no people who have been left behind in like a rural area. Okay. So we don't have a mass like a division that Richard mentioned in Japan, because companies are not firing people. They feel that employees are the assets, and they retrain them in the company. Whenever you have automation or AI come in, they have been replaced and retrained, and they have been reshifted to different locations. And therefore, that kind of stakeholder capitalism is where I think you should look at Japan about the future of the capitalism.
That's very interesting. Okay, Jimmy, you had a point to make about the UK on this.
One of the things that we see in the report is that the UK is now very near rock bottom. Just one.
The UK is the second least trusting country in the world of institutions, which is.
As you mentioned earlier, we've just had an election with a landslide victory for the Tories. But one of the problems we had both in the previous election and in this election, I'll just give you some numbers here. The Scottish Party, SNP, got 3.9% of the overall vote total and ended up with 7.4% of the members of parliament. The Liberal Democrats got 11.6%, and they only got 1.7% of the seats in parliament. So the mapping from how people are voting to what ends up happening in parliament is really badly broken in the UK. And that means for people, when you look at the Brexit numbers, people's support for Brexit, it basically was only in favor of Brexit for a very short period of time around when we did the Brexit vote. Since then, in the most recent election, the anti-Brexit parties got overall more votes than the Tories did, than the pro-Brexit parties did. And so if you go back to the previous election, so this one I'm particularly agitated about because my side lost. I'm very anti-Brexit. But if you go back to the previous election and you see that UKIP got more votes than the SNP and got 0 seats in parliament, which means that segment of society was not represented. They felt like the system isn't working. A lot of people in the UK feel, it's one thing to say, oh, wow, this is amazing. Look at this democratic society, the mother of all parliaments. And why don't people trust it? Well, it's not really that democratic anymore. It's really broken. The US, we could go on and on about the gerrymandering in the US and how the House of Representatives isn't really competitive and so on and so forth. So some of these issues aren't just a matter of, why are people not trusting? What's caused that to happen, ethics and all this. It's also, the system is actually broken. And that's a really tough problem to fix because by the nature of an elected system, the people who are benefiting from it don't tend to want to fix it. So that's, for me, that's...
So is your number one thing to restore trust, reforming the electoral system? Is that what you're saying?
I think reforming systems. And, obviously, I'm not... normally, people would expect me to be talking about the quality of information sources.
We'll get there.
I can also bang on about quite a lot. But for me, it's that sort of question of, really examining not just why are attitudes this way, but what's actually broken about the systems and how do we fix those things?
Okay, Brad, just to you quickly. The US, the economy's been going very strongly, unemployment's very low, and still this distrust is very high. I mean, what's the single most important thing for you in the US economy that needs to change to get this back on track?
Well, I think in some ways, we're not necessarily living through unprecedented times. If you look at each major period historically of rapid and massive technological change, it tends both to exacerbate income inequality, and it especially saps confidence in people who worry that they don't have the skills to be successful in the next era. And historically, these things get to a point where ultimately democracies correct. You tend to see the rise of populism. That's usually the indicator that a political correction is coming. And you look at, to me, one of the most interesting days in American history was the 14th of September, 1901. What happened that day? William McKinley died. Theodore Roosevelt became the president. The Gilded Age ended. The Progressive Era began. And you sense this around the world. Will we shift in a manner that fundamentally addresses some of these broad concerns? Will, as Richard said, businesses invest more in lifting the tide of everybody who works for them? I think that there'll probably be some day or days in the course of this coming decades when we'll see some historical similarities. But I do think that we have this other challenge in the 21st century that we didn't have in the 20th. One is, I think democracy is less agile. It goes to the point that Jimmy made, whether it's gerrymandering or money in politics. You could argue that the democracy is less responsive to people than it was in the past. And second, democracy is under attack from the outside, fundamentally with the weaponization of technology by certain authoritarian governments who are clearly using it to attack politicians and spread disinformation. And then fundamentally, you have the fourth estate, this great pillar of democracy, journalism, that has been weakened. And it has been weakened by technology as well. We've seen the complete evisceration of classified ads, and so people are chasing clicks to try to make up for it. So you see the pieces that are going to have to be addressed over the course of this decade, I think, to restore health in democracy, which does require a certain level of confidence in capitalism.
Just go back to you quickly. You talked about a big political event in 1901. What should companies be doing? Richard made the point that people trust companies to be effective, and obviously, companies have huge amounts of power in the economy now. What should they be doing unilaterally without relying on governments? And you, as Microsoft, one of the biggest companies in the world, what's the onus on you guys now?
I think, first of all, I think that the BRT's statement is the right approach. I mean, I would argue that we've been following that approach as a company for 7 or 8 years, and thinking about not just our profits for our shareholders, but the needs of our customers, the needs of our employees, and the needs of the communities in which we work. I think we should be making investments that are more broad-minded, and we have. We put $750 million into affordable housing in the region where we have our headquarters in Seattle. Last week we announced we'd put $1 billion into a climate innovation fund to really try to accelerate the technology needed for carbon removal. We should do what we can, but will democracy be saved by people who are not elected by the public? I doubt it. The world's democracies need to be led by the people the public elects, and the rest of us need to do our part. But if this were a movie, I would argue we are aspiring to get the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, not the leading actor in the play or the movie. We all need to do more, but democracy and confidence in it, I think, must be restored first and foremost by the people the public elects.
Okay. Sabina, you run a big private company. What's your view in terms of the responsibility of a CEO to try and reverse some of these trends, particularly the trends around people not feeling that the next 5 years are going to be better? I mean, I think I've got the numbers here somewhere. They're quite striking just how, you'll have to read it, sorry, but it's quite striking how few people, particularly in the developed markets, believe the next 5 years are going to be better for them. So how much of the onus is on the business community where they get their livelihoods from to really change that mentality? And what are you doing on that basis?
First of all, I would like to thank Richard for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. And as you're saying, we're a private company, and both me and my sister, who is here in the audience too, we're part of the 4th generation. And our family business group dates back to 1877 in the shoe business in Spain, in Mallorca. And we started in the tourism sector 60 years ago. So that's more or less our track record, more than 100 hotels in 20 countries, 35,000 employees, just to give you a brief introduction of our company. And I completely agree that trust is the only way to do business, absolutely the only way. And we as a family business, we have a long-term view, and we have no doubt that a company is absolutely key to drive economic growth and to generate value, to create employment. That's clear. But values, there's no doubt that values are also more important than ever. And as a family business, we have very deep and strong values that have translated into corporate culture, and that's there. And I think that nowadays it's not enough to only make money. I think companies are expected to make money by doing good. They need to have a purpose, and that purpose has to be honest. It has to be real. It has to be very transparent. And all the different stakeholders, they have to really feel that that purpose is translating into the customer experience. There's an action behind it. It's not only at a corporate level. It's not about the speech at the corporate level. There need to be a translation in the customer experience.
And does this come through in real behaviors? If you look at, there's a lot of talk about how, and Richard mentioned this again, how customers are making decisions based on their views of the world and what they want to happen. Mm-hmm. Is this borne out in their actions? Is it just them saying they want that, or are the employees and customers really voting with what they believe? Is that being seen?
Yes, we see it, absolutely. In our case, when we talk about our purpose, it has to do with caring about people and the environment, and we want to do so by leading the path towards a responsible tourism model, and we have incorporated that in the core of our strategy. So it's really our brand identity now, and it has meant a transformation of our operations. We're changing everything, and we're engaging our employees and our customers. We're seeing that engagement, really, and there's a real demand for that. And they want to see action. It's not about speech. Okay. They need to feel it, and that's the main challenge we have. And in our case, as a family business, and because we really believe in it, starting with the CEO, my sister, the Chief Sustainability Officer as well, and the rest of the group, 35,000 employees, we're really moving and taking giant steps towards that direction through a movement we've called Wave of Change. It's like an ocean stewardship. That's where we focus our effort.
Brad, just going back to you, on this issue of executives speaking out, this desire for people to have their CEO speak out on social issues, on environmental issues and others, can you give your perspective on how vociferous people should be, and whether really, we've seen some CEOs over recent years come out on big issues, but it's not the norm by any stretch. Does this need to increase? I mean, do they need to fill that vacuum?
Well, certainly employees want to see their employers speak out. That's a broad statement. It's not equally true in every industry and in every country, but it's certainly a rising trend, and this report has captured that in recent years. I do think that it's important for a company to have a principled basis to know when it's going to speak. I don't think that leading a company is just a license to take your personal views on whatever you happen to care about and use the company as your personal platform. We've really, for ourselves at least, tried to say we're going to speak out in three areas. One, when something affects our customers and their use of our technology, privacy, security, responsible AI, digital safety, these kinds of things. Second, we do want to be a voice for our employees, both their ability to work and to be retrained, to have access to broader social programs. We've tried to use our voice into our supply chain, people who are working on our products, and the rights of our employees to get a house, to rent, to marry the person they want. All of these things we've felt comfortable about. And then our business more broadly. I mean, this is where sort of businesses traditionally have spoken out, things like taxes and the like. But it doesn't, I wouldn't be here to say our principles are the right principles for everybody, but I do think it's good for a company to have a set of principles and know what it's.
But you're not about to get more vociferous on this?
Well, we've gotten more vocal. Last week, we announced a major carbon initiative, and among other things, in addition to saying that we would be carbon negative by 2030, we'd remove all of our historical emissions by 2050, we said that there were 4 areas where we would use our voice on public policy. And one big one is on the development of carbon removal technology, something that we feel we'll need to use and everyone will need to use. So we've said we'll use our voice on public policy that facilitates accelerated research and development, more transparency, so there's common measurements for across business in this space, removing regulatory barriers. So I think one can be thoughtful and then be vocal. I think it's usually good to do it in that order.
You think thoughtful first, okay.
Yeah, thoughtful first and
Yeah.
thoughtful second.
No, I have no doubt. I mean, I love this picture of business being the supporting actor. But I actually think that I have no doubt that the supporting actor will get the Oscars. I think supporting actor will get the Oscar because there's so much being done and there's so much responsibility being taken. We hear that everywhere in Davos and have heard it. And just your latest opinion, I think, has really underlined that. What I'm worried about is that the supporting actor will not do enough to really support the big debate about supporting democracy, supporting what politicians are, what they do. And I think if the jury is really out, both on market economy and democracy, we need all the help we can get. And I'm speaking as a former politician, we need all the help we can get. We need a help, for example, to talk about how do we actually change capitalism. I think, I mean, the one thing I will say to the Edelman Trust Barometer for next year, ask the Nordic countries more. We are 20 million people up there, and we like to be heard in the Trust Barometer as well, because I do think that we have to find a new form of capitalism which is not only about redistribution, which we've talked about for so many years, and we got just quite right in the Nordic countries. Well, the next step of capitalism is pre-distribution, where we talk about how do you really become stakeholders in the market economy? How do I, as a citizen, gain when my country becomes richer? So that's the next big discussion. The other next discussion is, what do politicians actually do? What does it take to invigorate democracy? And two things that are lacking right now is that politicians no longer has a responsibility towards the truth. You guys can help with that. Politicians do no longer get respected if they engage in any form of dialogue and compromise. Compromise is seen as a dirty word. You are weak politicians if you engage in compromise. And I truly believe that we will never gain trust in the market again or democracy, liberal democracy again, if we don't invigorate the art of compromise and dialogue and a bit of kindness in our political world. So I think that's where you can help us as well.
I would actually, wait. I would say fix democracy first.
Yeah.
Figure out what it does to do that, what it takes to do that. We'll find a way to succeed as a business. I'd much rather, there are 76 democracies in the world, according to the Economist's annual ranking. 48% of the world's people live in democratic societies, but democracy is under assault. Yeah. And we have to put our energy behind that.
So we're going to look to Japan for stakeholder capitalism and to the Nordics for democratic rebirth. So that's great. Jimmy, I just want to move. We're going to go to questions in 1 second, so please have a think about questions you want to ask. But I just want to go to technology very quickly. One of the other striking things in the survey is there's been a big fall in trust in technology in the last few years. Now, it's still the most trusted sector. So that's a fall from a very high level. But one of the things that comes through is people's fear of the pace of change of technology, and that they fear whether it's for their jobs or the way that information moves or just the whole speed of society. Can you just talk to that quickly and a little bit about whether it's justified and B, what you can do about it? One of the things that struck me yesterday was this talk of the EU trying to delay facial recognition technology, for example, to allow people to kind of catch up and think about the implications of it. Will you just give your perspective on that pretty important issue?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hugely important issue, and it's one that's actually looming over us. When we look at, just for example, I was in a taxi in London last week and chatting with the taxi driver, and he said, I think I've got about 5 more years, maybe 10, before this job is completely gone because driverless cars are going to take it over. And I think he's I mean, it's the first time most people who aren't keeping a close eye on technology think it's science fiction. It'll happen in 50 years, maybe. He's aware, and he may or may not be right about that timeline, but it's something big that's happening. And you know, if you look in the U.S., for example, there are 2 million long-haul truck drivers, and long-haul truck driving in the U.S. is tedious, boring. Humans aren't very good at that kind of task. It's easy. It's not like driving in a city in terms of the driverless car thing. Those jobs, those 2 million jobs, are going to go away. Also, they're going to go away very quickly because there's no. It's not about consumer acceptance or consumers afraid to get in the car. No, these are big companies. They're going to look at the numbers, and as soon as it's cheaper and safer, they're just going to switch, you know, within a few years' time. And there's 2 million people who are going to be out of work. That's just one sector. And those people are now beginning to realize, and they are afraid, that they know their job is going away. They're receiving no help for retraining. The government seems to be asleep at the wheel. And this is true in many, 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 many sectors, that the kinds of jobs that ordinary people have that used to be quite good jobs, now they're just jobs. And they're just thinking, well, where am I going to be?
What's the solution to that? I mean, clearly it's not stopping technology, but
I mean, it certainly isn't stopping technology, because if we step back from that piece of the problem and you just look at the incredible the cost savings and the human lives saved by not having to have people do these quite terrible jobs that can be done better by machines, that's a wonderful net positive for the human species, as we will be more productive and wealthier in general. So you wouldn't want to stop the technology, but I do think that governments and businesses need to be much more acutely aware and investing now in that retraining. Now, in some cases, it's going to have to be governments stepping in to fund the retraining. So, for example, the trucking industry, they aren't really well positioned to retrain their workforce to do something completely different, because what's the point of that? It's not like, you know, where you're talking about some companies, you can say, look, this part of our jobs are going away, so we need to retrain our own workforce into other jobs, and that we're going to sort of take advantage of the opportunities. But unless we really start to focus on that, which is, you know, people aren't stupid. Like, they see, hey, the system is already beginning to break apart for me, and I'm looking at a lot of terrible gig economy jobs. It's coming faster and faster, and I'm going to be swept away. Where's my lifeline? What am I supposed to do?
Yoshi, you want to make a point then?
Well, Japan is one of the few democratic countries where we accept innovation and AI. Whenever we have news about AI, we welcome them. Simply because 2 reasons. One is that we have a lack of labor, which is a bottleneck of Japan, so we need more people, so we need to increase more productivity, so AI is a good solution. Second is that there is a good sense of safety net, that even though my job might be disappear, the job, you know, I will be replaced to something else, and which will have more value-added job for human being. Like the driver is not really low-added job. However, he or she may be able to shift to more for AI, controlling the system as itself, and that kind of like a more value-added retraining innovation can be done. I think innovation can be accepted. Let me just talk about democracy. You know, lots of people talk about democracy is being dead, but I think democracy has to be based on the more and more people involved in discussion in constituents. However, what I'm finding out is that not many people are speaking up, which is not shown in the survey. And I'll give you an example of Fukushima right after 3/11 in 2011. Nobody spoke up for nuclear energy because it is, it's a very clean energy. If you talk about climate change, we need to have a clean energy. However, the vast majority of people shut up because elected officers are afraid of being lost in elections. And then CEOs stopped saying that because they are afraid about being boycotted their products by consumer activists. And then, so only people who are speaking up is only influencers, and some people who are some kind of like journalists who are very left, who are very lean into extremist ideas. And then there was not enough discussion going on. And so therefore, I did a discussion with Masayoshi Son of SoftBank for 3 hours and 25 minutes. And what I concluded that time was, CEOs and all the leaders have to speak up no matter what background they are, no matter what companies they are. They can speak up no matter Microsoft or Globus or Wikipedia, regardless of their organization. They should be free to be speaking up. And that's what we needed. And when I heard about Brexit, what happened to you guys, like business leaders in UK? What have you been doing? You haven't been speaking up, That was the reaction that I got from the Brexit.
I was going to say, I think there's a really interesting point about Japan, though, that we don't necessarily think or talk about, and you just alluded to it. Japan is one country where the population is shrinking.
Yeah.
There's two kinds of countries in the world, those where population is growing, those where population is shrinking. And there's 20 countries or so where population is now shrinking. Japan, South Korea, Eastern Europe, where it's even shrinking more rapidly. And if you have a country where the population is shrinking, there's really only fundamentally two ways, I think, that you can accelerate economic growth: more immigrants or more machines.
Sure.
And especially in societies that haven't historically wanted to foster immigration, believe me, you show up in Japan, it's like, thank goodness you're here. You're going to bring artificial intelligence, and that's going to replace the people who are retiring, and this is going to sustain our productivity and economic growth. And it just shows, I think, how varied the world is. And what is, the right solution in one place may or may not be seen quite the same way in other places.
This is what, sorry, Sabine.
No, I would like to make a comment regarding Hele's intervention before. That I think that companies might win a few Oscars, some of them, not all of them, but it's impossible to win an Oscar without government support as well. So it's not only about communicating with governments, but acting together. And we could not do what we're doing regarding responsible tourism without governments. So we have to be loyal to governments, but we also have to demand certain conditions to be more productive, to generate value. And it's the same with media. Media is absolutely essential to have information and to help us take decisions, but the other way around. It's like the perfect vehicle to give us the opportunity to share our plans, to share our growth. So the same with NGOs and other institutions.
Okay. I'm going to go to questions. I just want to just finish with Brad quickly, which is, so do you see a world where technology flips from something that people fear to something that they see as the solution to these problems? I mean, we touched on it with Japan, this issue that actually, in a demographic world where the workforce is shrinking, this can be a huge benefit rather than a fear. I mean, is that a valid scenario, do you think?
Well, I was struck about a week ago. I was rereading the speech that John F. Kennedy gave in 1962 when he said the United States would go to the moon. And he had a phrase there that I thought was a remarkable phrase, and it's even more interesting because it comes from a different time. He said, technology has no conscience. And how can it? It's not a human being. It is a force that leads to a wide range of changes. And I think it's ultimately up to people with a conscience to figure out how to respond to all of the changes that are unleashed. There is always a reality that technology and technological change enables wonderful new things. We should expect AI to help us cure cancer in the next 15 or 20 years. But it is going to eliminate many jobs. It is the underlying factor that is making outsourcing possible, globalization possible. It is the underlying factor that is leading to all of the automation that is going to force people to have to learn new things. And so I think the fundamental question is less about whether technology will be a source of optimism or pessimism than whether our reaction to the technological change will.
Can I take some questions? We'll do this gentleman then over there. If we could get a mic at the front, please.
Hi, question for the panel. How do you gain trust of customers after the trust been tarnished by bad actors? I'll give you a specific example. We're in cancer diagnostic space, Brett talked about earlier, and under the shadow of Theranos, how do you regain the trust from investors and customers? And after all, the bad actors are minor, but they represent so much.
Okay. Brad, you want to?
I would just say fundamentally, trust ultimately rests not on what you say, but what you do. And and of course, I think we all generally recognize that if you lose it, it is a heck of a deep hole to dig yourself out of. So the best way to sustain it is to just engage in consistent, proactive action that will sustain trust. And then, of course, you have to communicate about it so people know what you're doing. I don't think that tweeting is a substitute for doing. So I think that it always starts with what you do.
Here at the front, please.
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the trust side of things, because clearly the trust is broken. And I'd just like to bring it back to that for a second. In the 12-step addiction program, the first step is admitting that you have a problem and that you're powerless against that. Now, is it fair to say that the model that we've built a system on, a one-legged stool of financial capital, is broken at this point as we've grown up, and that to have a stable stool, we have to look at different formats to bring the three other legs to that. So it's not just financial capital, it's social capital. It would be human capital and environmental capital. And we bring those together and we can bring trust back. Organizations can continue. Capitalism becomes a non-issue in the sense of whatever we're dealing with in that way, because we're looking after everybody. And trust comes back naturally. And I would like to see what your take is on that, whether that's just a pie-in-the-sky dream or if it's actually possible based on the leaders that are sitting here in this room today.
Hello, hello, and then Yoshi.
Yeah, I absolutely think that it is possible to change this trust. I think this, from the gentleman asking the question before, I am an optimist. I mean, there's so many reasons for to not be, but we can fix democracy. We can fix the tax issues that we are talking about here. We have, in certain moments of our time, of our history, had wake-up moments where we had to adjust. We had the first and second industrial revolution. Suddenly we realized, oh, we can't actually treat our workers like this, where we treat them like animals. We can't have child labor anymore. And then we adjusted and made regulation in terms of that. Then in terms of the chemical industry, suddenly we realized we probably have to regulate this. We had a few nuclear accidents and regulated it more. Now we have the tech and we have to regulate that in a different way that we're doing. And it is possible to change that trust. And I also want to add one thing about the trust. The reason why people also express, I think, the reason why people also express this lack of trust is also because social media has given so many more people more agency. And we must never forget that with more agency for the individual is also creating more opinionated individuals who actually follow the news more, knows what's going on, and forms opinions about trust or no trust. 50 years ago, loads of people would not have that agency to even form an opinion. These were women who weren't engaged in the labor market or weren't engaged in the democratic process. They might not have had the same opinion. So agency also creates the dysfunction of actually increasing this distrust. So it's a weight that we have to cherish, and I think the agency that social media has given all of us is quite significant and will come with some negative sides, but also some huge positive sides.
I've got a big red screen here saying
up.
time's up, flashing at us. Are we able to have another question or two, or should we, because I know that people are busy in Davos. We happy to go on for a bit? Okay, Simon.
Thanks, Donald, and thanks to the panel for a really stimulating discussion. Simon Freakley, Alex Partners. And when we talk about technology and the role in trust, maybe this is a question particularly for Brad and Jimmy, it seems to me that technology is not only a disruptor, but specifically connectivity is accelerating all the other disruptive forces. To what extent do we think that the forces we've talked about this morning will further accelerate because of connectivity? Nearly 3 billion smartphones in the world. What will this do to trust in the future? When we're sitting here in a year's time, will it be much worse than today?
Jimmy, do you want to take that?
I think that's very hard to say because it's not clear to me that there's a linear relationship between connectivity and trust, i.e. the more connected we are, the less trusting we are. I'm not sure that's true. It has been true certainly recently. So I think that depends on how a lot of things develop around, for example, the business models of journalism. Do we return to an era or do we have a new era with a rebirth and a blooming of local journalism, which is a part of the erosion of trust? Or do we fail to do that? And in which case, it's not clear. So I think it's hard to say, but it's a good question.
The one other
question we should all keep our eye on.
The one thing I would quickly add is there is the other side of the coin on connectivity. The worst thing you can do, I think, in a world that is changing because of technology is actually live in a place that doesn't have high-speed connections to it. So if you want to find a place where unemployment is higher, where job growth is lower, where confidence is really suffering, then look at a map of where there is broadband coverage. And Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Canada, the United States, Mexico, many countries, the places where confidence is the lowest is actually where connectivity is the lowest, because these people are being cut off from the great economic opportunities.
True. Okay, final question, lady. Well, there's various people. Is there a microphone here? Okay, everyone's pointing at this lady who's very keen to ask a question.
Hi. It's Claire from the Wellcome Trust. What I was going to ask is, it seems to me that some companies are doing some really brilliant things. For example, what was announced at Microsoft last week, but it's kind of happening in isolation. And actually, perhaps we need companies to share insights and work together on some of these issues. Do you have ideas about how we can do that? For example, on climate change or diversity? In the absence of regulation.
I would say two things in part that we really have thought about a lot because we've been thinking a lot about carbon. One is just, I think it's good if we can just share more about what we're doing. We published a 4,000-word blog last week, produced videos, graphs, all the things just to try to share everything we were doing and learning, and we hope that that'll spread and we'll learn from others. But second, if you ask why is competence higher in business, I would argue that in some ways because business is so rigorously focused on measurement, and the market is an incredible system of measurement. And if we really want to move forward on carbon, if we really want to move forward on getting businesses to invest in worker retraining, we will benefit if there are standardized approaches to measuring what we care about and pressure on businesses to be transparent in reporting about it. That will unleash market as well as political pressure for all of us to sort of do, in a more competent way, the things that we're talking about needing to have done.
We're going to shut it down there. I know in Davos everyone is rushing to their next thing. The panel will be here, I'm sure, to talk individually, but I know that running 4 minutes over is not what you do in Davos, so apologies for that. But thank you all for coming, and thank you to the panel.